is bad. So we have a little Excel matrix that helps us prioritize where we're working. New York and Ohio being our two most immediate priorities.
Did the law include anything to help law enforcement identify the difference between the three categories?
Yeah, so we were happy about that too. Starting January 1, 2017, so manufacturers have a year to implement it. You have to display the type of e-bike in a visible spot and, with pretty large font on the bicycle, which is easy for bike manufacturers to implement, which is good. They can do that state by state depending on where they ship their bikes.
So that's the main enforcement mechanism is someone with an e-bike could be pulled over and identify if that e-bike is available or allowed on that facility, right? Yes.
Just one question right to that. If, grandfather clause in terms of the existing stock. So what happens with them because they won't have an identifier on them?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and we haven't ironed that out. But my sense is that we'll ask. Well, one, there aren't a lot of e-bikes on the road right now. There's a significant number, but there's not enough for it to be an important problem. But we'll ask that if you do own an e-bike, and we'll try to get this out through social media and through the bike shops, that you go to your local bike shop and pick up the sticker and put it on your bike. But most manufacturers, especially the responsible ones, are starting to put that on their 2016 models that get shipped out. So they're implementing it now. It's not a big switch for them.
So they didn't have it seems like to me that you would have a standardized sticker, standardized font, standardized location, and all that.
The law goes so far as to say the font needs to be Arial 0.9. And then in the first quarter of this year, the industry will put out or kind of agree upon what the sticker should look like, and then they'll use that everywhere.
Okay, so they are going to let the industry decide that.
What's written in the law, there's a provision that states exactly the font and the size of the sticker, I believe. Yes, so there will be a standard design for the sticker. So that's kind of in the weeds. I'd be happy to talk more about it, but our intent is to get more people on electric bicycles and make it legal for them to do so they're not riding technically illegally.
So is all the information on your website, on some website?
So
our website.
The information, all this is on peopleforbikes/pages/e-bikes, and I can share that. I'll put some of my cards out on the table if anyone would like, but we're going to use that as an information and resource clearinghouse too, so it will be updated with handouts, outreach documents, things like that. One more thing, we're putting together 3 pieces of information, one for agencies, one including law enforcement, one for consumers, and one for retailers, explaining the law and how it affects them. So we'll do that by the end of January.
Very good. Any other
Put
questions?
my cards on the table.
There's a whole mess of laws out there across all the states, and that's one of the things that Tennessee, e-bike is, depending on who you talk to, a moped, okay, and with all sorts of very strange ways to interpret how you use a moped and so on. So
if you're interested in the law in your state, John and probably some of his colleagues put together a report with a table that has all the different laws, and I think e-bikes have maybe 20 or 30 different definitions depending on what state you're in. It's laughable.
Yeah.
But this is a good first step, and it's the first state to really do the 3rd classification, which is the speed pedelecs.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the real issue about the stickers, and there's not really enough out there to really worry about what's out there now. But because they're the ones that are going to be actually somewhat potentially banned from certain facilities and not allowed to be on them, where most e-bikes will be able to be on bike facilities no matter where. So it is interesting. I do have some issues about banning devices on facilities based on what they can do versus what they should be doing. So it's not a performance measure, a performance-based standard where many regular bikes go faster than e-bikes, and a speed pedelec can go faster than a bike, but it doesn't have to. So, and if you saw a lot of the speed pedelecs, they don't weigh and look any different than a normal bike. So it is a potential issue, but we'll deal with what it is as it is.
Right. And one of the points of this is there's different classifications. We have different stakeholders here. We've got people on the trails and natural surfaces. So the aspects of this that are very nice is you can start to really be differential in how you manage e-bikes on urban transportation or even recreational trails. Okay.
Can I just add 2 quick things? One is just to follow up on what John said. It's kind of the Ferrari versus the average vehicle analogy. Just because you have a Ferrari doesn't mean you'll go 150 miles an hour down a neighborhood street. So the main issue we get in opposition to these bills is safety, but local agencies can put on safety. You can enforce speed limits where applicable and expect the user and the consumer to comply. The second is, because we do get concerns from safety officials and law enforcement, sometimes it helps to get them to actually ride on an electric bicycle. It's a much different experience once you've been able to provide one and see what they can do. So I would be your liaison. If you ever want to set up a demo, we can set that up really easily wherever you are, just with the local bike shop. So that's an important tool in our toolbox too, just to increase people's understanding of the technology. Yeah. Sorry, I'm hijacking this.
Go ahead.
Do you mind if I ask? This is
Yeah.
a little bit.
Let's do quickly though.
What?
Let's do quickly though.
Okay.
Easy, quick
So,
question.
okay, so the helmet laws, that was something that was already in existence in California, and you were sort of just following it. So it's, as things go ahead, is it basically the recommendation that for the type 1 and type 2, they just follow whatever the law is that for in that state? There's not a piece of this that's trying to change those particular laws in other states.
No, generally there's no mandatory helmet law for traditional bicycles in the states, so we'd like to follow that. But for class 3,
Because it would get very messy if we started to get into.
I was just wondering about the, blanking out on the sidewalk riding, whether or not there's a predominant of banned sidewalk riding in California, or whether or not it is common for regular bikes, and how is that implemented with this law?
Generally, sidewalk riding is banned in business districts, so we would look to have e-bikes follow whatever the local ordinance is. I mean, I mentioned this morning. This is my last. Then I'll shut up. But we'd like traditional low-speed electric bicycles to mirror the laws that are applied to a regular bicycle. That includes sidewalk ordinance.
Very good. Okay. I'm gonna cut it off there. So there's a couple online. We pushed the start button a little bit too late. They missed the introductions. But for those, is it you, Jonathan, that's online? Are you there? Anybody home? Yep. I think, well, Jonathan Weiner, he's presenting in a few minutes, but he's online, and we're going to do our best to get him speaking. If there's somebody else online that would like to introduce themselves too, that would be a good time now, okay? But while we do that, I'll sort of skip a little bit of some of the other stuff we're going to talk about and get to the presentations that we have. Again, trying to expand the breadth of light, low-speed vehicle research, new emerging technologies, and so on. Allison Conway from City College, New York, is been doing light freight, bike trikes, and other things in New York for a while. And we've been watching her, and we're very happy that she was able to come and share a little bit of what she's doing. Would you want me to just hand you this thing?
Yeah,
That's
probably easiest.
So,
so like Chris said, I think that's a good way to start this discussion. Is we're not really sure what to call this. When we started our project, it was the Freight Tricycles in New York City project. By the time we finished it, 3 years later, cargo cycles seemed to be the term that was taking shape. So there's a changing vocabulary. But what are we actually talking about when we talk about cargo cycles? This is the actual vehicle model that we studied in New York. But the general cargo cycle is just a primarily human-powered vehicle that with cargo carrying capacity. And there's lots of different models. On the left, there's a major study going on in Germany right now. On the bottom left is who I probably consider I don't think there's any doubt, the best operator in the US in terms of cargo cycles is Beeline in Portland. And then on the right, this is a vehicle that's operating in Paris. And you can see the different shapes, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is as I go through the presentation. I don't want to harp on this because if I do, I'm going to go way over my time. But just to kind of lay the groundwork for what we're dealing with in urban goods movement in New York, the vast majority of last mile goods movement occurs by truck or van. That's how goods move. In New York City, as you would expect, we've got something like 7 hours of congestion a day. High parking fines, expensive tolls, inadequate available parking, and our loading dock requirements for off-street loading docks have not been updated since the 1950s. So a few things have changed since the 1950s in terms of freight demand in the city. More recently, there have been some major changes happening to the streets in New York. The bicycle network has massively expanded. All over the city, we're making complete streets updates to the intersection designs to make them more pedestrian friendly. What does that mean? It's reducing the turning radius, using bulb outs, installing raised medians to make the network safer for pedestrians. We've also installed 8 bus rapid transit corridors, so dedicated bus lanes. At the same time that these changes are happening, something else is happening in freight. All of us are ordering things online that we want delivered within 2 hours or 2 days, or basically freight demand is completely changing. The e-commerce used to be a negligible amount of demand. Now, instead of having large trucks full of large shipments, we have very small shipments going absolutely everywhere in the city. So our demand is going up, the size of the loads are shrinking, and we are making the street network less compatible with truck movements because we're shrinking the capacity of the motor vehicle lanes, we're taking those turning radii and reducing them, and so it's becoming less. And so the study area, I just wanted to point out that I'm actually talking about is the absolute heart of Midtown and downtown Manhattan, which is the densest, most crowded part of New York City. So what was the purpose of our project? We wanted to look at what are the potential applications of cargo cycles in New York City, what are the benefits, challenges, and barriers to operate, and how do they perform in New York City conditions. Today I'm going to focus a little bit more on the policy stuff than on the numbers. I will show one slide with numbers, but I think in this setting the policy is more interesting because I think that's where we have a lot of overlap in terms of the things we're dealing with. So on the policy side, we did a state of the practice review. We looked at the literature, which is primarily coming out of Europe. And because there was essentially no literature in the US, we also conducted a survey of North American operators, most of which are in medium to large size cities. The one exception is we did have an operator in Ames, Iowa. But otherwise it was Portland, Vancouver. I won't go through all of them, but mostly mid to large size cities. Then the second thing we did was we actually outfitted cargo bikes operating in New York with GPS devices for 2 operators who I'll discuss in just a second. I'm not going to talk too much about the literature review except to make the point that there is a growing body of literature in looking at these cargo bikes. Most of these studies were conducted in Europe. Most of them have focused on the cost of operating these vehicles, the cost trade-offs when you shift from a larger motorized vehicle to these electric bikes. There's a little bit of research going on in the US, primarily my research group and at Portland State, and I just saw a paper from Texas here this week. So, so just to talk first about the benefits of cargo cycles. Why are we looking at this vehicle? I think the obvious one is they're small and they don't burn fuel for urban operations. But there are also some other benefits. Because they don't burn fuel, they have lower maintenance costs. They offer driver health benefits, which is actually a major problem in the trucking industry. When you're sedentary for too long, you're in a high stress position. This is a much more pleasant lifestyle when you're operating a cargo bike. Probably the most important thing that they offer for urban goods movement is they're extremely flexible to park. You can park it on the sidewalk, you can park it, depending on the regulations, but you can park just about anywhere with a cargo bike. That's certainly not the case with a larger freight vehicle. Why are they good for cities? This one is, I think, the reason that we probably should see growth in this in the US is that they are not inherently compatible with that pedestrian infrastructure. We are designing ourselves out of having cities that trucks can navigate at this point. And so if the truck can't navigate, then it's going to need to be replaced with a smaller vehicle. Getting rid of the heavy vehicles, then you have reduced exposure to accidents with heavy vehicles, particularly as they interact with non-motorized modes. Those are very dangerous accidents. Reduced emissions, reduced noise impacts. However, it's not all a rosy picture. There are certainly major challenges. The economics have to make sense, and there's such a thing as an economy of scale. If you're moving large volumes of goods and you're using the full capacity of that vehicle, putting it onto something very small is not going to cut your costs. And when it comes to the freight industry, the cost is the bottom line. So unless you have a business that is willing to pay a higher cost to demonstrate their green credibility, this is not going to, in most cases, make sense. There are certainly exceptions. There's high driver costs. The reason I say high driver costs is because, one, this is a physically challenging job to ride a cargo cycle, so you have to pay a decent wage. Workers' compensation insurance is very high in New York City, particularly because they have to pay the insurance that the bike messengers pay, which is very high. There's also a customer perception that this is not a serious mode of transportation. And this is something that I think in the US is, Europe has started to overcome this a little bit, and I'll talk about why in a second. Another major issue is that, what is this thing? It's ambiguously classified, and we've seen that both in the US and Europe. There are two operators, one in London and one in Paris. The operator in London purchased his bike from the operator in Paris, literally the exact same vehicle operating on the streets. In London, it's a bicycle. It can park on the sidewalk. It can operate in the bike lane. In London, it's a moped. It has to park on the street. It has to park, it can only operate in motor vehicle travel lanes. And when it parked on the street, in the commercial loading zone, it repeatedly got ticketed because the enforcement did not recognize it as a commercial vehicle, even though that's what it was doing. So it's this very ambiguous classification. Why are things so different between the Europe and the US? There's a lot going on in Europe in terms of trying to manage the impacts of urban freight. The EU has heavily invested in studies, large-scale pilot studies, not large-scale at the individual sense, but in multiple countries testing out these types of technologies. I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but there are policies like they outright ban trucks during certain hours of the day, or they ban trucks above a certain emissions level. What that does is it gives these vehicles a competitive, I wouldn't say competitive advantage, but it cuts, there's a big cost difference, and this reduces that cost difference to make it a more competitive vehicle. In North America, again, we have confusing regulations. In my city, I unfortunately live in one of the states you were just talking about, New York. Electric assisted bikes are not legal. So the bikes we monitored were actually completely human powered. And we do have pedicab regulations, and some people think those apply to these bikes, and some people don't think they apply to these bikes. The reason we have pedicab regulations is because the horse-drawn carriage operators and the taxis got very upset when the pedicabs started growing. A reason I wanted to talk about this public sector difference is what these vehicles are being used for now is very different in the US and Europe. In Europe, they are being used for last mile parcel delivery for major carriers. You can see that's TNT, which is a major parcel carrier, DHL, others, even FedEx and UPS, are using these in the densest part of the city. They bring in trucks overnight and use these vehicles during the day, during the congested part of the day to make deliveries. In North America, it's almost exclusively food that's moving, not exclusively, but it's primarily food. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about our traffic performance, but in New York City, we tracked 2 different businesses that were operating these bikes. A local bakery chain that was making on-demand deliveries basically from their main center. The other is a local food rescue organization. The reason I mention this is because we actually saw fairly different operations for the on-demand operator with a bunch of drivers who got a lot of rest. And on City Harvest, they were operating a 12-hour shift with no break. And they were not really making on-demand deliveries. So the bikes on the right traveled at a much slower speed than the bikes on the left. So we actually equipped the vehicles with GPS, estimated through performance measures, and then looked at some externalities. We also came up with another measure while we were looking at the data that we hadn't explicitly wanted to look for, and that's the actual distance traveled to make the delivery. We found that the bikes actually make much shorter trips. Occasionally it's because they're traveling the wrong way down a one-way street for a block. Often it's for traveling through a green area where a vehicle wouldn't have been able to drive. So just a very quick performance summary. We basically found that the trikes are speed competitive. About 80% of the time, the truck's traveling at a speed that the bike could feasibly be traveling. On average, to travel a mile in New York City, in Manhattan, the city bakery trikes actually operated faster than the City Harvest trucks. So you could make that move faster with the trike. Because our streets are so congested, you can just bypass the traffic. I don't want to spend too much time harping on these, but savings are what you would expect. You have emission savings, you have space savings. So I just wanted to come back to the key points that what we added to sort of those slides that were at the beginning. Basically, we confirmed these issues with infrastructure flexibility. Some new things we found, they definitely have reliable travel times within a congested business area, which is a huge advantage in freight. They offer shorter trip distances on a constrained network. They offer reduced road and parking space consumption, which in a city where curb management is an important issue is a major savings. On the challenges side, and this is my last slide, we have a few things. These bikes are constrained by human limitations, as you would expect. And this is where it comes back to what you all are interested in with electric assist motors. Unfortunately, in New York State, we cannot use any type of electrification on these bikes. And so when we talk to the operators who are successful in Portland and elsewhere, they say it's absolutely essential that they have the electric assist to move higher volumes of goods. And we currently don't have it. And the data played this out. I just wanted to show this graph. The graph on the right is the average moving speed versus the average travel distance. And you can see the decrease. The longer the trip gets, the driver starts to get fatigued and speed is reduced. So I know that was a really quick presentation. There's a several 100-page report I refer to you if you'd like to take a look at that. And I just want to thank we had lots of supporting partners. We were funded by New York State and all the businesses that worked with us and lots of students and researchers.
Very good. Thank you. So any questions? Just a quick, yeah, go ahead.
And so, I know part of the reasons why the New York cargo cycles are not electrified is because of the laws. And if those things are successfully changed, maybe by Morgan's work there, they'll be electrified. And I know in Portland it is. So for the purpose, I think, of this committee, where do you think the benefits of electrifying in maybe New York, how that might have changed things? Or would these logistic providers want to be electrified?
Yeah, that's so when we first started the project, we asked the guy who it's sort of a strange business relationship because it's one person that maintains the bikes, but then the businesses use them. He was leasing them, then they bought them. Very complicated. But the central guy that we were in touch with first told us, "Oh no, there's no benefit to having electrification because then it makes it more expensive to maintain, and we don't need that." But he has since kind of changed his tune. And I will say, for those of you not familiar with New York, Midtown and downtown Manhattan are fairly flat. If I tried to take the bike up to Harlem, where I work, you couldn't. It would not be feasible at all to use this type of vehicle without some type of assist to go up those hills.
So a couple things some things I'll save if I can get your email. Because, so we actually use cargo bikes through our public works department.
Oh yeah, Wednesday.
Well, Wednesday started anyway, so you know this is Metro Health that has a cargo bike, and then so now we bought some more, and so I was just going to say it also is in the public sector, so we use it for compost pickup and recycling pickup, and they're looking at expanding it. So it's there's a different kind of a business model, so it all relates to that could actually be very useful for other kinds of industries.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would just mention is that as we're thinking about different kinds of vehicles, there are other kinds of bikes that have some of the issues, the larger bikes, cargo bikes being for kids in addition. We're seeing more and more of those. And so we're also thinking about, like, we changed our bicycle parking requirements to match that. So I just want to think about, as we don't want to be behind the curve, so we don't want to think necessarily about cargo bikes separately from, for goods, separately from those for kids, where there is some overlap in terms of space requirements, parking requirements, any kind of regulations, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
We don't miss the boat in one.
Right.
This is all great, and I would love to get your vote for it. We're also doing a good study. I'm getting off track.
Yeah.
So
No, and I'm happy to give you my card and to discuss.
So Allison does have to run, and we've got to keep moving. Do you have a quick question, or?
Yeah, just any of the research look at the air pollution effects on the actual operator?
On the operator, that is not something that has been studied. As far as I know, none of the research that I've seen has covered that yet.
Very good. Okay. So cargo freight, that was one of the big, or one of the areas that we found even from industry. We've been working with Beeline. It's a real opportunity for the e-bike industry or the e-bike world, the freight world. Okay. Next, the experiment is going to happen right now. We have Jonathan Weinert, who is, let me get him online here. There he is. Let's see if we can hear him, huh? Go ahead, John. Okay.
Two, microphone check.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully we do hear you. We hear you vaguely. So you'll have to speak clearly and in the mic, and we will have this thing turned up. But Jonathan is I'll let you introduce yourself. He's at Bosch, but he's going to present on an interesting study that he did in the context of Bosch. Let's see if I can get this thing slid down nicely here. I'm going to cover this. There, you can see him. And so he's going to tell me when to advance the slides, and I'll do that. And right now I'm on slide 1, which he may be able to see in his other window on his Google Hangout.
Oh,
just to make sure that we're.
I can.
This is like
nice.
It's like
okay.
3 ways of
it doesn't
communication.
look like. Yeah, there it is. Okay, can people hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, fantastic. So I wish I could be with you all. I'm very jealous. TRB is probably my favorite conference of the year, and I haven't been in 5 years. But yeah, anyway, hope you guys are learning a lot and doing some good networking. As Chris mentioned, I work for Bosch e-bike Systems North America, and I'm here to talk about a recent survey, a nationwide survey we completed just this past October that shed some light on our most important stakeholder, the e-bike end consumer. Next slide, please.
Yes.
Before I delve into the survey, for those of you not familiar with Bosch, I'd just like to give a brief introduction. We were founded about 130 years ago in Stuttgart, Germany, to develop automotive products like spark plugs, alternators. We became we're the largest automotive supplier in the world today. And about 7 years ago, we started developing electric bike systems leveraging our automotive technology. And yeah, so we entered the European market a few years ago, and just the U.S. market 2 years ago. So we're relatively new to the U.S. market, and yeah, we're all about creating products invented for life. So that's about Bosch. For those of you, next slide, please. For those of you not so familiar with the e-bike scene in Europe, e-bikes are booming over there. And as you'll see from the slide that Chris is about to pull up, maybe I have a delay, so I'm still seeing slide 2. But as you'll see from that slide, in 2014, roughly 1.2 million e-bikes were sold in Europe. We expect this number to triple by 2022. And just as a comparison, the US bike industry today, they sell roughly 13 to 14 million bicycles per year.
Okay, we're on slide 3 now. You want?
Okay.
Yeah. You can't see
Okay.
it for some reason.
Now slide 4.
All right, this is complicated. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Okay.
I'll let you guys take a quick look at slide 3, because that's important just to set the stage for where e-bikes are in Europe. You'll see where they are in Europe, and to give you a rough idea, in North America, we estimate that the volumes are roughly 10% of this. So we're quite a few years behind Europe in terms of e-bike market development. Okay, now on to the end consumer online survey that we conducted.
You're there.
First of all, a little bit about the methodology. It was this survey was conducted online, and it was distributed through independent bike dealers and electric independent bike dealers. So traditional bike shops and electric bike shops through September and October. And the key incentive for people to participate in the survey was they get to enter the chance to win an e-bike. We were pretty happy with the results. We got 800 respondents, roughly half and half e-bike owners and half traditional bike owners. And also a pretty good 50-50 split between male and female. So in the next few slides, I'm going to explain what we learned about electric bike end consumers, the who, the what, the where, the why, and the how. Okay.
Slide 5.
Can you see slide 5 now?
Yes.
Great. This slide shows who rides. At least these were, based on who responded to our survey, we found that the majority of e-bike owners are in their 50s and 60s. This is not surprising. This is exactly what the situation was in Europe a few years ago. The market is getting younger and younger in Europe, and I expect it to do the same in North America. So baby boomers, they're our strongest group, and the reasons why they ride, you'll see that on the chart to the right.
Yes.
Can you click that in? The reasons that they ride, they state they ride for better health, fun, and just for pure transportation to get from point A to point B. Okay, slide 6.
We're there.
Great. Furthermore, on who rides, we tried to identify roughly what type of households they're from. We find that mainly it's couples that are purchasing e-bikes, not necessarily together, but what we find from dealers is that either a husband or a wife will come in, get an e-bike to ride with their partner, and a few weeks later, after riding together, the partner will then get an e-bike as well. Fairly well educated and quite a wide range of annual income, as you'll see from the chart on the right. Okay, next slide.
Okay.
In this chart, you see how people use their e-bikes. We asked them exactly how you use your e-bike, and most people, the majority said it's for recreation and exercise, or it's for commuting to work or school, whatever. Next slide, please. I wanted to show this slide from John MacArthur's research, which falls in line with what we found from our survey. He also asked his respondents what were the main reasons you bought an electric bike or converted a standard bicycle to electric, and same sort of responses, either to replace some car trips, for health, to ride with less effort were the big responses there. Okay, slide 9. If you forget everything from my presentation, I hope you at least walk away with one key nugget from this presentation. This is probably the most important result that our survey showed. It showed, not surprisingly, that electric bike users actually use their e-bikes much more often than bicycle owners. And it's not surprising why. I mean, when you have electric assist, you have fewer obstacles to not picking up the keys when you head outside your door, the keys to your car. You know, hills are no problem. You don't have to worry about sweating. We just didn't really have quantitative evidence to say how much more e-bike riders were riding than bicycle owners. And while this is still a fairly limited survey, only 800 people, this represents people all over the US, and it shows that they're riding 3.5 days per week compared to the average 1 day per week of bicycle owners. Next slide, please. Number 10.
Yes.
I wanted to show this survey from also research results from John MacArthur, which they fall in line with the same thing that we heard. And what you see in this chart is that the frequency of bicycle usage by trip purpose during the program where people were given electric bikes compared to before the program where they only had a standard bicycle, they are using this device more for transportation. Okay, and then finally, I would just like to, say a special thanks to Lever, Light Electric Vehicle Education and Research Center, Chris and John, for providing some of your research results to weave into this presentation, and also the last few months just collaborating with you guys. I hope we can collaborate a little bit more in the future as well, so that we can continue to do more important research to guide policy, get better policies about electric bikes and how to regulate electric bikes. Because I think there's a lot of societal benefits that electric bikes can bring. And look forward to your questions on this presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Jonathan. So Jonathan has been in the e-bike world since 2006 or something like that, or 5. Him and I were both interested in, and he's lived in China for a long time studying e-bikes, and it's great to see Bosch and him engaged in Bosch bringing these sort of big players into the US e-bike industry. And it's great, frankly, to see a growing body of research in North America on e-bikes. We're getting to the point now where there's enough e-bike users out there where we can start to say something about them, not as this sort of innovator, early adopter, still an early adopter phase, but not just the hobbyist anymore or the tech geek. They're getting more mainstream in North America, and John MacArthur was one of the first to really reach out across the country and look at them. This is a great additional amount of work that Bosch has been doing. Any questions for Jonathan Weinert online before we shut down the phone call part? Yes.
Jonathan, could you comment a little bit more about what's happening in Europe with the speed e-bike market versus the regular e-bike market? I saw recently that the Netherlands some of the cities in the Netherlands are looking at a program of interstate speed e-bike ways in the north of Holland. Is that market starting to grow for those bikes?
Yeah, I'm getting some echo now. Hello?
We can hear you. A little chirping there, but did you hear the question?
I didn't hear the question.
Okay.
Let me see. Hold on. You can still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, the speed electric bike market it's growing in the Netherlands. It's pretty strong in Switzerland, where they don't really have tight regulations on speed electric bikes like they do in other countries in Europe. We still see the most important part of the market as just the regular pedelecs, pedal assist electric bikes, max speed 20 miles per hour, max motor power 250 watts. And the speed segment is still what we consider a niche part of the market. Regulations are gonna, there's a new regulation in place in Netherlands, which will come into play in 2017, and I'm not exactly sure all the ins and outs of that regulation, but it'll make it more difficult to own and operate speed pedelecs.
We're gonna talk a little bit about. Boy, let me mute this real quick, or you mute my speaker. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Europe in a second. Any other questions for Jonathan before we move on? And this is it's great to see national surveys of e-bike users, and that's really what we need, or national observations at least. Okay, and so anything else? Last call. All right, so Jonathan, thank you. We appreciate you chiming in from across the country, and I'm glad the technology seemed to work at least a little bit. It did pretty well, and lucked out maybe, but we did okay. And so at any rate, stay online if you want to see this, and I think you will. So talk to you later, okay?
Thank you, everybody.
Yep, bye. Okay, so next we have Peter Silverens. Did I get that name, last name right?
Completely right.
Okay, and Peter has been doing some interesting work related to European pedelec instrumented studies, okay? And so I wanted to get him in to see what's been going on in Europe, particularly as it relates to naturalistic type data. Hopefully you can do it in about 10 minutes or so, because we're starting to slack off a little bit on the schedule and get a little late. But try to keep it going. And
I intended to start a presentation by saying that I included quite a lot of slides, but they will mainly serve as reference documents. And just to give you some information, because I was always also asked to give you some information on market shares and the state of art of bicycle and particularly pedelec use in Europe. So I copy-pasted some figures and put them into the presentation. And on the actual experiment itself, I'll try to be brief and just give you the references where you can find the information and show you a little bit what the experiment looked like. Apart from that, I think it's important. I think we did some interesting estimates. I skipped that. On the relative risk of cycling compared to other transport modes, and I think that's one of the main issues with pedelecs, but I'll come into that. I'll need the presentation to make the point at the end. But let me tell you, just in general, cycling is a very important mode of transport in Europe, but it depends largely on the country. Most countries where bicycles are used most are Denmark and the Netherlands. Belgium is somewhere on 4th position together with Germany. So we have a quite big market share in transport volumes for cyclists in general. I'm not talking about e-bikes here, just all types of bicycles together. I'll give you an idea of market penetration of e-bikes in a minute. We know that Share of bicycle crash fatalities mainly follow use of bicycles in different countries. This is a slide that goes back to 2011. You see, I only talk about the Netherlands to the left. In 2011, they had 21% of their road fatalities were cyclists. Last year, they went up even to 50%. So their road safety problem right now is getting a bicycle safety problem. That's how big cycling is in some European countries. For the rest, we know that crash risks per kilometer driven are inversely related to the number of kilometers cycled per year in any country. That's what I illustrated in this graph, but I included this safety by numbers ID just for completeness sake. The thing I would like to show you to start off my presentation is this graph. It looks complicated, but actually it isn't. We actually calculated, based on hospital data that take under-registration into account, the relative risk for a serious injury for different modes of transport for different ages compared to, sorry about the blinking of that illustration, it's annoying, compared to an average car driver. So the average car driver is in the middle on the lowest part, all age groups taken together. We put his risk at 1 and compare relative risks compared to that. Then we see for cyclists in general, all age groups taken together, cyclists have a 23 times higher risk of getting severely injured in traffic than the average car driver. And we mainly see a big problem, these are Belgian data, dating back to 2010, for elderly cyclists. But this has been confirmed in a number of other European countries. We see enormous risks of cycling or getting hurt on a bicycle for elderly drivers. Now, the other thing is, I will show you that electrical bicycles are mainly used by elderly drivers, which really raises the question, what's going on there, which is the reason why we actually did the experiment with the probe bikes. So next slides I will go through quickly. I'm not a legal expert. I don't know about legal requirements. When we're talking about pedelecs in this study and in most European countries, we're talking about the type 1 bicycles that were illustrated in California, just assistance up till 25 kilometers per hour with some limitations on the motor, and the definition that you have to pedal for the motor to kick in. That's what we're mainly talking about. There's a small market share of speed pedelecs, but it's less than 5% of the total market of e-bikes. Here, sorry about that thing popping up. Chris, you asked me to include some sales figures. Actually, they're not as recent as the ones that the guy from Boss just presented. He told you in 2014, total number of figures went up to 1.2. Actually, luckily I have it on the left part, but it's in German. It's sales figures for e-bikes in Europe in units. And actually in 2013, they estimated it to be 1.2 million. Maybe might be more speaking if I relate that for some countries to percentage of use in the population. Here to the upper right, in the upper right figure, you have e-bike kilometers as a percentage of all kilometers cycled per age. And there you see for the Netherlands that for the group above 45 years of age, but it goes up to around, let's say 20% of all kilometers driven by bicycle are driven on a pedelec in the Netherlands. I have a similar figure for Belgium. It's more elementary. I didn't have time to translate. This is just the percentage of people that declare to have used an electric bicycle over the last year. And it's split up according to region. The northern part of the country, Flanders, is where bicycles are most used. There we're at around 10 to 15% of all people of the entire population above 55 years of age. They used at least once an electrical bicycle over the last year. So that's just the idea to say is getting, skip this, it's getting huge in problem in Belgium. And so if you combine all these elements, you've got the reason why we actually decided to do a study with a probe bike to look into the cycling behavior of elderly drivers using an electrical assisted bicycle. It's just the combination of these elements. Maybe I should comment the graph to the left. It's one of the only estimates made, but it's only available in Dutch. It's made in the Netherlands. It's an estimate of the relative risk of an e-bike compared to a classical bike according to age and gender. Man is man, female is Vrouw. We see, but there's a huge gender difference. But apart from the gender difference, the message I want to give, it's a very serious estimate based on a relatively large sample. It shows that above 60 years of age, it seems really that the relative risk per kilometer driven is higher in elderly cyclists for an e-bike compared to a traditional bicycle. So it's a point of attention as well, which brought up to the main, I'll be brief on that, to the question, is there anything special for an elderly driver driving an e-bike compared to a classical bicycle? And then, I promise you, Chris, I'll be brief on the experiment. Actually, we collaborated with the SWOF, which is the Dutch Road Safety Institute, who already published, and it was published in AAP, an experiment, actually a field trial they did with a probe bicycle. Here is an illustration that illustrates a little bit what a bicycle looked like. It measured speed, GPS position, true Wi-Fi, heart rate of the driver, and then stability with 2 parameters. I would like to discuss on measuring bicycle stability. It's almost impossible from an engineering point of view or physical point of view. But we had 2 variables. The steering angle, actually sampled with a certain frequency, the absolute value of the steering angle, and we had the leaning angle as well. So the position of the bike in a vertical plane. Apart from that, they also combined it with an interesting contraption to measure mental workload, which was just a peripheral detection task. Attached to the helmet was a small rod at the ends of which we had a LED, and it lit up every few seconds. And then we had a push button at the handlebar of the bicycle, and whenever the light went on, they had to push on that button. Of course, it has nothing to do with driving a bicycle, but it allows you to measure through reaction time and percent accurate responses what is going on with the mental workload of the driver. So in the Netherlands, a first experiment was done on that, and actually the results of that showed, just in general, not very unexpected, that speeds chosen on electrical bicycles were higher than on conventional cycles. But regarding heart rate data, they didn't analyze, and regarding mental workload, the only thing that mainly came out of it that was in complex traffic situation, mental workload was higher, both on a pedelec and on a conventional bicycle. So regarding that aspect, the experiment was, let's say, rather inconclusive, which wasn't the actual reason why we did the experiment. Actually, the Netherlands, in French it's called Pays-Bas, it's really flat. I think the highest point of the Netherlands is 200 meters of altitude. In Belgium, we don't have mountains either, but it's a lot hillier. So we mainly, and I'll be brief, replicated that experiment, and on the right lower part of the graph, you see the trail that we asked the participants to drive. We just had a steep downhill part, a flat part, and a steep uphill part, and we tried to figure out whether that could make a difference regarding driving speeds chosen on conventional bicycles and electrical bicycles, and on workload and heart rate. And then I just want to, it's just 10 seconds to give you an idea of what the experiment looked like. We conducted it with 40 people above 65 years of age. Despite all the manipulations and tasks they had, but they managed after 10 minutes of exercise to do the tasks they were required to do, which was actually follow an indicated trail of about 4 miles, where we, on which, is that music coming from my computer?
Sounds like it.
I hope not. That wasn't the purpose. Something weird going on.
Started
there.
immediately when
I'm riding a bike.
you switched play, it came on, so I thought it's nice soundtrack. It's coming over the.
Yeah, it's a coincidence. Okay, let's build up the tension for the results. And now the results. I have 2 graphs with results, and then I'll wrap up. Well, I don't mind some music.
Yeah, keep it going. Yeah,
Let's keep it going.
It's Wednesday afternoon.
Maybe I'll stand up to show you depicted in this graph. Here to the left we have speeds for, and I wouldn't mess up the legend again, So the conventional bicycles is just the plain colors, and the electrical bicycles are the ones with stripes. We have it for 3 parts of the route. We ask them to follow uphill, which is in red, conventional, which is in flat, which is in yellow, and uphill, which was in green. And we actually saw that people drive faster on a pedelec than on a conventional bike, apart from the downhill stretches. Regarding steering angle, we obtained a completely symmetrical result, which was actually problematic regarding the conclusions we could draw from the experiment. We never managed, not in a statistical way either, to disentangle effects on speed and effects on steering angle movements. We're still trying to figure out a way to do it. But actually, we dug deeper in the literature on how to actually measure the stability of a bicycle. And when I dig into that literature and I ask experts, I more or less gave up that it will be possible to have really a clear parameter or a single parameter for bicycle stability. So that's for driving speeds and bicycle stability. I can be very brief on physical and mental workload. Actually, on mental workload, all results were not significant, so we can't draw any conclusions based on that. For heart rates, we did see some tendencies and differences which went in the direction of the obvious, that you need less effort when you're driving an electrical bicycle than a classical bicycle. But it was an attempt to measure differences in driving behavior between classical bicycles and conventional bicycles, and that's the most important thing that I wanted to share with you, that we're trying to do work on it. We're not always successful, but we're trying. So, thank you.
Very
That's
good.
it.
Thank you. So, any questions? Did Bernardo come back in?
Just one, when you mentioned the difference in heart rate or something, was it statistically significant?
It was significant, especially for the uphill part. Yeah, which the confidence intervals were quite small, and it was certainly significant.
Were these experienced elderly cyclists, or
Not really.
Okay.
There were experienced cyclists.
Okay.
But we had a mixture of. I just in the area around our institute, I just posted the old way. I asked them, "Do you want to participate in the study?"
Yeah.
And we had people that were curious about electrical bicycles that had never driven one. And people that say, okay, I want to participate. I had a reward as well. They wanted to participate. A mix of both, but they had experience driving a bicycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I see a hand over there.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Difficulty measuring stability.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to bring this up, but CSI had Cyber had a program that it mentioned something about, I think like an accelerometer in the new Salon that could measure motion, because the phone is on a person and the person fell down and something like that. If that is actually true and not a fabrication of somebody's in Hollywood, that would be
But actually, we had a gyroscope into our measuring devices. The actual problem is not getting the data on leaning angles and steering angles, but relating that to bicycle stability, especially a bicycle cornering. At first, we thought, okay, we had acceleration of leaning angle, or the quadruple of that we were going to use as a measure for bicycle stability. But then I went to look into the literature before I tried to submit it for a journal, and then I really became very reluctant, and I said, my background is in psychology, but I know some engineers and some guys in physics, and in the end, I just dropped the whole idea to make firm statements on bicycle stability based on the parameters we have.
I'm going to pull a plug on the questions for now, just because we want to keep going. Thank you very much. It's really good work and really interesting naturalistic work, and we can talk just a little bit about that after. I want to introduce Geoff Rose, who's going to talk about non-e-bikes, okay? So this is something that's come up many times in this committee. We haven't had a lot of research that's been going on. Geoff has some ongoing, maybe preliminary work that he's been doing on motorized scooters, which is a major issue in mobility for obviously a lot of people. So go ahead.
Thank you. Australia, like many countries, has got a challenge in the years ahead. We're going to see an ageing population. So by 2033, nearly 1 in 5 Australians are going to be 65 years of age or older. And one of the challenges for that group is that many of them will have grown up in an era where they expected independent motorised mobility. When they come to a stage of needing to hand in their driver's licence or their family takes their licence off them, it's very challenging for them to go with mobility options around public transport because it often doesn't service their needs. Many of those people look towards some sort of a motorised mobility scooter to provide an independent mobility option for them. I thought it was appropriate to introduce these vehicles to this subcommittee because it's about light electric vehicles and they take a variety of forms. So the traditional mobility scooter is probably the one on the top left that many people have seen. The ones in the middle are starting to look an awful lot like a mini version of a Google car, but they're for sale in Australia. And the one on the right demonstrates that they're not always just a single person mobility scooter. So that was a double mobility scooter on the top floor of a return services club in Australia. They'd gone up in the lift in the building. Now, from a point of view of even infrastructure design, footpath widths, how easy is it to manoeuvre that vehicle close to a pedestrian push button to be able to call up a pedestrian a pedestrian call sign? It's very tough. In Australia, users of motorised mobility scooters are classified as pedestrians. The regulations are that the vehicle can go no more than 10 kilometres per hour. And as is often the case in many areas of transport, there's a dearth of information on these vehicles. Because they're pedestrians and because they're low incidence in the population, normal travel surveys hardly ever pick them up. There's only one state that keeps data on motorised mobility scooters, and that's Queensland. And the reason why they've got data is because they require the vehicles to be registered. The rider has to go through a medical assessment before they can get a permit to register the vehicle, and that's so that the vehicle's protected by third-party insurance, so that if they run into somebody else, even in a shopping centre or on a footpath, they're covered by insurance. The Queensland, I should add that one of the challenges that we've already got in Australia is as the use of these vehicles goes up, fatalities and serious injuries are going up. And I want to draw your attention on this graph to the bottom line. That's the 0 to 64-year-olds. So these are not only vehicles that are used by the elderly, but they're also used by younger people who may have health issues, obesity, other medical conditions that mean that they can't travel independently. The trend in Queensland, and I was interested in the presentation of the guy from Bosch because the percentage growth rate in these is exactly the same as the percentage growth rate in electric bikes in Europe, nearly 16% growth per annum in Queensland. We were able to look at the age of the registered owner of the vehicles in Queensland. And again, I want to highlight that there were users down at younger age groups who, through a variety of medical conditions, are needing a motorised mobility scooter. I should add that in Queensland, electric wheelchairs are also picked up under that regulation if they're going to be used out on the street. But clearly the majority of the users are elderly and some into advanced ages, and where many of these people would have either been by choice or by requirement had to give up a driver's licence. We undertook an initial piece of research to try and look at what are some of the issues with these vehicles in Australia through some in-depth interviews with a range of stakeholders from age associations, local government, state government, road authorities and the like. What I'm going to do is very quickly highlight some of the key issues that came up. First off, it's really important to keep in mind what tremendous value these vehicles provide for their users. For many of them, it's a way of maintaining independent mobility where they don't have to rely on friends and family. I love this quote about pain-free movement. This was from a centre that provides a little test track for elderly people to come in and use it. Now, it's the wind in the hair, the bugs in your teeth feel when they get out on their motorised mobility scooter. These vehicles can allow a person to stay at home longer before they need to go into independent or supported care, and they can really reduce the sense of isolation, and for many, they have a positive contribution to mental health as well as physical health by allowing people to engage. There are some challenges though. There is a lack of regulation of the vehicle, so there is no standard for motorised mobility scooters. That's becoming an issue on public transport because they come in all shapes and sizes, and it's difficult getting them on and off heavy rail in Melbourne. There's a lack of assessment of the users. Many of these users have been required to give up their driver's licence, and sometimes that can be because they don't have the cognitive or motor skills needed to use a car. And yet automatically they're on one of these at 10 kilometres per hour. So there are challenges there. There's a range of them on available for sale. And one of the challenges that a number of our interviewees highlighted was that oftentimes it's family members that purchase one for mum or dad. They don't necessarily think about the needs and the different models and what's the match between those. And we also don't understand much about how they're used in the current environment. As I said, there's a lack of regulations in terms of the types of vehicles. We don't have standards, and so we've had instances of people not being permitted to use public transport on a vehicle which the operator said that's not a regulation motorised mobility scooter, when in fact there is no regulation standard. The user assessment, I think, is potentially a key area. When we've got users up in their 80s and 90s, now a number of those will have the capacity to use it safely, but even amongst other pedestrians, and particularly amongst elderly pedestrians, if one of these things hit you at 10 kilometres per hour, the pedestrian would come off second best. It would be a really serious accident. And there's no ongoing assessment of fitness to be able to use it. So people get it, and then it's not until personal experience, my father rolled his, and that was the reason why he doesn't use it, or had to stop using it. So in conclusions, I think these are a vehicle we're going to see more use of in the years ahead. It's a space that's not well covered either from the perspective of regulation of the vehicle or the user. I thought that in the context of this subcommittee, it's an interesting vehicle because it crosses across. The users are technically classified as a pedestrian, and yet it's a low-speed electric vehicle. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to hold questions on that for a little bit after we're going to be done officially in 2-3 minutes. And I wanted to just make a few official, for the record, comments as we move forward with this. So one thing, Jacob, call you out. ITDP and UC Davis wrote a high shift bicycling study. And one of the main findings was e-bikes are a big part of that future. Corroborate that or not? Do you have?
Yeah, I have
you
some
don't
stats that I can pull up in a sec.
give me the 10-20 second version.
Right. So basically, we did a global analysis with UC Davis using a international mobility model developed by the International Energy Agency, a lot of car companies and energy companies. Looking at the potential impacts of a great increase in cycling around the world, to follow up to a study that looked at public transport as well and walking. And what we found was there was a huge potential for a large impact from e-biking, something along the lines of 300 gigatons of carbon dioxide reduction from baseline. As well as trillions of dollars in reduced infrastructure spending that would result in it. And the paper also outlines a number of policies that would need to be adopted to achieve such a scenario.
Thank you. Yeah, that report was just released a couple months ago or so, and you can find it online on ITDP's website, I assume. Yeah. And so check that out. Okay, it's very cool. Thank you. A couple of other just little tidbits of information. One is there's a tracking of electric bikes and bike share systems globally. That number is up to about 6,000 bikes are in bike share systems now, and that's not something that we hear a lot about. We had our first bike share e-bike launch nationally, citywide here in Birmingham, Alabama. Okay, so the South is doing their part on the bike share, e-bike share part. Okay, Pro Walk, Pro Bike. Can you say a little bit about the plans for a bike session?
Well, in the past, e-bikes have not been part of the discussion, or at least in sessions. We the last go around in Pittsburgh, we tried to get a panel together. We're going to try to do that again this year, and hopefully with the work that People for Bikes have done over this last 2 years, they'll elevate the discussion. And I think that's a lot of practitioners out there that are in trying to encourage more cycling. So I think e-bikes can play an important role in that. So
good. So yeah, that's a big conference, and practitioners and others there, and I think that would be talking about future steps for the people on this committee. If you're interested in being a part of a e-bike oriented session, you can talk to John or me or maybe others here, and we can put together what that session, what that panel might look like. Okay. Yeah. They're getting to the future, I guess. The agenda has all these things like our scope, our name. If you take issue with anything in this, our scope or our name, why don't you just send an email to Geoff or I, and we can discuss it internally and address it. Okay, we won't spend any time talking about it here. We had a call for papers this year where I expected more papers, frankly, because we had more without a call last year on e-bikes. So with the call, we got 12 papers. 7 were accepted for presentation. None were accepted for publication. And so there's some, it's just a statement of fact. That said, e-bikes are growing kind of globally in the research realm. We'd like to see more publication, more presentations, maybe even e-bike oriented sessions or whatever in the future, whether they're poster sessions or full-blown podium sessions, okay? We also put out a research needs synthesis statement, I should say a research synthesis statement last year, and it did not get picked up again. I've been discouraged by that, but at the same time, the NCHRP process has a lot of competing interests, and e-bikes are probably not quite there yet on the top of their red button, hot button issues. But in the bicycle committee last few hours ago, they were talking about how it took them 5 times to finally get one funded. So I propose we just keep on hammering on that one. The one we put on was a synthesis of safety issues. We're finally getting safety data with the help of the folks in Europe, with some of the stuff we've been doing here, where we can actually say something meaningful, statistically valid about the safety of e-bikes relative to other modes of transportation. And so I think that's something we need to keep on pushing. I think that's about all I have. Any questions for us, for me, for the committee? Any recommendations about where we're going or what we're doing? I think part of what my goal is just to keep elevating e-bikes as a topic of worthy of research and interest and discussion. I think the industry is there. I think a lot of government agencies are there. Start back there. Saw your hand first.
I like the expanding a little more into this scooter area, because I'm seeing more and more usage on roads of that over the time period. But also, especially with the battery life, batteries improving so much, and the weight dropping on that, the ability to, put them almost on in the back of your trunk practically, maybe in another year or two.
Yeah.
And also the fact that we not only have them on our roads, we have them in every bloody grocery store,
Sure.
2 or 3. There's no licensing or anything. And it's just, there's so many, your assessment of information raised so many questions on our aspect of it, because it is a road device as well as a pedestrian device, and it just seems like it's something that maybe needs to be a little more defined in our realm of the area.
This is something we've talked about in this committee, but not done anything really. And the fact that Geoff has actually done something now is great. And I think we would like to see more of this sort of assessment
The last,
in
the one
US.
question I have for him is, the last time I looked at the range, it was somewhere around 3 miles.
Oh, no.
What is it now?
Oh, no.
This
no,
was 5 or 6
yeah.
years ago.
Funny, when you were talking a second ago, I thought you were going to say we can see them on interstates. But yeah, certainly, when I think of the ones that are available that I've seen back home, you'd certainly be looking at 20 kilometres.
20 kilometers.
It's like you commute to the metro station.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
So,
and I could see them being a bike locker or a bike cage.
right, yeah.
so
So then our bike lockers need to be able to handle it.
it's the same as with the e-bikes. If you go back to the early days of e-bikes, it was all this lead acid batteries. Now, with some of the mobility scooters, some of the cheaper models do still have lead acid, but they'll go through the same technology evolution. It'll be a move to other forms of battery technology that will reduce the weight, that will increase the range. But that's not going to do anything for the capacity of the individual ones, other than they're going to be further out of their comfort zone in terms of areas where they operate. I would imagine that one of the big challenges in the United States is in many Australian cities we've got reasonable sidewalk infrastructure. In Australia, you're allowed to use these devices on a road if there is no sidewalk. But in much of the United States, there probably is no sidewalk. And when you're riding a thing with very small diameter wheels, you really notice pavement quality. And so you will ditch the sidewalk very quickly to get onto the road. And I mentioned that my own family experience was my father rolled one. The biggest safety risk with mobility scooters is sideways stability. So if you get one on a cross slope, they will tip. And so that's for a lot of the injuries that we're seeing in Australia are either single vehicle crashes where the user rolls the vehicle, or they are hit by a motor vehicle.
Okay. Kara.
I was just going to say that in terms of articulating either for the RNS or something that was like a poster session or a paper session, that we should use the hot topics to which these vehicles fit all three: the transformational technologies, resilience, and public health. When I say resilience, like solving the problem before, as well as like being able to get away from the floods. Anyway, but I'm
good point.
Dead serious that would totally frame it to match those hot topics.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
is the way to get it risen to the top, I think.
Let me use that point to shamelessly plug the Light Electric Vehicle Education and Research Initiative that we've, it's John MacArthur and folks at Portland State, me and folks at University of Tennessee and Geoff Rose, at Monash University. So we put together this consortium. We've focused on 4 or 5, depending on how you count, topics. One is market and behavior. Other is sustainability and system impacts, safety. Another one is shared vehicles, shared e-bikes, health, and freight. So we're kind of covering a lot of those areas. The health part is kind of quite an interesting piece of that. And I was talking to one of the organizers for Pro Walk Pro Bike, and they said health is a big part of what we're interested in at this one, and e-bikes are a big part of that equation. So hopefully we can zero in on some hot topics. Okay.
Following what the TRB wants us to do.
Right. And one of the things also we're doing is more of this naturalistic type of data collection where we get real world data where we can answer these questions about health and about similar to what Peter's done. Okay. That's kind of the next frontier, I think, with really quantitatively answering these questions. Okay. You can look at levresearch.com, and that's where a lot of the resources we have are put up. All that literature I showed you will be up there. So if you have a grad student that wants to do a literature review, you don't have to pay them for a month to do it. You can just send them to our website, and we can help out that way. Okay. Any other questions?
Just I have handouts from Federal Highway Administration, pedestrian bicycle stuff. So I'm here, but I gotta skedaddle.
Yeah, I'm sorry we ran 10 minutes late. I think that's not cool with the TRB schedule. But at this time of the day, I think we're not we don't have too much competition. Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you for all coming and keep in touch. Please contact me if you have any comments or questions. Okay.
Just one brief question.
Yeah.
Was the papers that you had in addition to